Have you ever wondered why a man becomes obsessed, not with the woman who gives him everything, but with the one who gives him nothing but silence? It is almost cruel, almost divine, this quiet mystery that bends the masculine mind into devotion. The modern world has forgotten the ancient language of stillness. It screams for attention, feeds on validation, glorifies the loud. But the feminine, in her truest form, was never meant to compete with noise. She was born to draw the world in through her quiet presence. Not to demand, but to evoke. When a woman falls into her own silence, she awakens something primal in a man. It is not her beauty that keeps him awake at night. It is the unanswered question she becomes, the unspoken story, the soft refusal to be captured. He feels it before he understands it. The way her stillness disarms him. He wants to know her, but there is nothing to grasp. She mirrors back his own longing, and he mistakes it for love. Alan Watts once said that desire is not about the object of desire, but the tension itself, the gap between wanting and having. And in that gap, the mind becomes addicted. When a man cannot possess, his imagination begins to worship. He turns her silence into a canvas for his projections, painting her with his fantasies and fears. Every unanswered message, every pause, every look that lingers just a little too long, it becomes a riddle his ego must solve. The truth is, silence is not absence. It is presence without explanation. It says, I am here, but you cannot own me. Most men have never met that kind of woman. The one who doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't fill the empty space with words meant to reassure. She's not performing to be chosen. She's choosing herself. And in doing so, she forces him to confront his own emptiness. That confrontation is obsession, because men too crave what is infinite, even if they don't understand it. They crave the feeling of something greater than themselves. And when a woman embodies that mystery, she becomes not a person in his mind, but a symbol of peace, of beauty, of the unattainable heaven he lost somewhere in childhood. He chases her not because of who she is, but because of what she makes him feel. Silence, when rooted in power, is not withdrawal. It's magnetism. It's the energy of a woman who no longer seeks approval because she has remembered her own worth. She doesn't explain why she didn't reply. She doesn't rush to fill the silence when he grows distant. She doesn't ask, what are we? Because she already knows what she is, and that knowing is unshakable. But this kind of silence cannot be faked. It must come from a deep inner clarity, from the calm after the storm of proving, the kind of quiet that is born after a woman has cried her last tears for being misunderstood, unchosen, unseen. It's the silence that arrives when she realizes that she doesn't need to be understood to be valuable, that she doesn't need to be seen to be radiant, that love, real love, cannot be begged into existence. Men sense this energy instinctively. They can't articulate it, but they feel the shift. The moment she stops performing and starts being, the moment her gaze no longer pleads for attention, but simply observes, the moment her words no longer aim to persuade, but to express. That's when he leans closer, desperate to feel what she feels, that freedom, that serenity, that sovereignty. To him, her silence becomes unbearable. It reminds him of everything he doesn't yet know about himself. In her stillness, he meets his own noise, his own insecurities, his fears of inadequacy, his hunger for control. And like a man lost in a desert, he mistakes her calmness for distance, her peace for rejection. But the truth is, she's not rejecting him. She's just not abandoning herself anymore. And that perhaps is what truly drives him mad. Not the silence itself, but the realization that her world no longer revolves around his validation. her silence becomes a mirror, reflecting his inability to rest within himself. She becomes both his desire and his torment, because she embodies what he has not yet mastered, inner peace. So he calls, he texts, he wonders, he obsesses. He tries to make her speak, to draw her out, to make her break her stillness. But she doesn't, because she has learned something he has not. That the feminine doesn't win by chasing. She wins by being. She is not a storm demanding attention, but the calm that silences it. And in that calm, the man either awakens or fades away. Silence in the hands of a woman who knows her worth is not emptiness. It's the echo of divinity. It's the reminder that mystery is sacred, that love is not performance, and that attraction is not manipulation. It's resonance. And so, the woman who learns to be silent, not as a tactic, but as a truth, becomes unforgettable. Because in her silence, he hears himself. And that is the most haunting sound of all. There is a silence that wounds, and there is a silence that heals. The first comes from fear, from withholding words out of defense, anger, or pride. But the second is born from power. It's the silence that comes after understanding. The silence that says, I no longer need to be heard to be at peace. That is the silence that makes a man restless. Because when a woman no longer fights for his attention, she reclaims her energy. And he feels the shift like an earthquake in his chest. In the dance of polarity, the masculine seeks direction, purpose, and conquest. The feminine seeks depth, connection, and surrender. But when the feminine stops chasing, the masculine loses his map. The woman who once filled the air with explanations, with soft reassurances, with endless giving, suddenly becomes still. She becomes water returning to its source. And the man who was once sure of his dominance now feels lost in the quiet ocean of her indifference. He will call it coldness. He will say she's changed. But what truly unnerves him is that her silence no longer revolves around him. It comes from within her. It's not a punishment. It's evolution. The feminine mystery is not a strategy. It's an awakening, a return to the original rhythm, to being rather than proving. Alan Watts said, to hold your breath is to lose your breath. The same is true of love. The moment you cling, you suffocate it. But when you let go, when you allow space, silence, and surrender, love breathes again. The feminine silence is that breath. It's the spaciousness that invites, not demands. It's the pause that allows the masculine to remember his own heartbeat. When a woman detaches, not from bitterness, but from wisdom, her presence becomes electric. She's not avoiding, she's observing. She's no longer acting from fear, but from awareness. Her silence speaks, and what it says is, I trust myself enough to wait. That trust terrifies a man because he cannot control it. Control requires reaction, but silence offers none. He begins to wonder what she's thinking, where her mind goes when she doesn't reply. He replays her last words, her last look. He tries to decode her stillness like scripture. But the more he tries to grasp her, the further she slips through his fingers. Because the feminine cannot be captured, only experienced. The psychology of this is ancient. The human brain is wired to seek completion, to resolve tension, to fill gaps, to make sense of ambiguity. But the woman who remains silent becomes an open loop in his mind. Every unanswered question strengthens the neural pattern of desire. The less he knows, the more he imagines. And imagination, when paired with emotion, becomes obsession. Still, this is not about manipulation. The woman who uses silence as a weapon may win attention, but lose authenticity. True power lies in the silence that comes from fullness, not the silence that comes from playing a game. It's the difference between withholding and transcending, between saying, I'll make him miss me, and realizing I no longer need to be missed. When that shift happens, her energy transforms. She walks differently. Her laughter isn't forced. Her eyes no longer search for confirmation. She radiates a kind of self-contained peace that cannot be faked, the kind that makes people turn their heads without knowing why. Her silence is not an absence of sound. It's the presence of self. And so he watches. He wonders how she can be so calm, so unbothered, so free. He tries to provoke a reaction, to test her composure, but her energy doesn't bend. She has learned what he has not, that love without peace is just addiction, that validation without self-worth is just noise. Silence is the space where power is restored. It's where the feminine remembers that she doesn't have to shout to be heard, nor prove to be chosen. She simply has to exist in truth, in grace, in patience, because the universe responds not to words, but to vibration. And the vibration of a woman who is silent because she is whole can move mountains in a man's mind. He will return, not because she begged, not because she reminded him of what he's missing, but because her energy pulls him back into presence. In her silence, he senses something sacred, a peace he cannot find in the chaos of his own world. He is drawn not to her body, but to her stillness, not to her voice, but to her mystery. And yet her silence is not for him. It's for herself. It's her temple, her home, her sanctuary. Within it, she hears the soft whisper of her intuition, the language of her soul. She learns to listen, not to the noise of desire, but to the truth beneath it. And the more she listens, the more she sees. Obsession is never about love. It's about the illusion of possession. The man who cannot rest in silence will always seek to fill it. But the woman who becomes silence, who wears it like a crown, becomes untouchable, not because she's unreachable, but because she's real. There is a sacred moment that happens when a woman stops reaching, when she realizes that the energy she once poured outward into explaining, pleasing, waiting, can be reclaimed and turned inward. That moment, quiet and invisible to the world, changes everything. Because the feminine heart, once it stops trying to be understood, begins to understand itself. A man feels this before he sees it. He feels the shift in her energy, the way her words no longer tremble with anticipation, the way her eyes no longer beg for recognition. Her silence no longer pleads. It simply is. It's like standing before a mountain. You can't move it. You can only be in awe of it. The masculine mind, wired for conquest and clarity, doesn't know what to do with that kind of presence. It's not something he can solve, fix, or own. He becomes restless in the face of her peace because it exposes the restlessness within himself. Her silence is not rejection, it's reflection. It shows him the parts of himself he has been running from. And so he oscillates between wanting her closeness and fearing it, between chasing her and retreating into distraction, because her calmness confronts him with the truth that love is not control. It's surrender, and surrender to the masculine ego feels like death. But to the awakened woman, surrender is life. It's not about submitting to another, but to the flow of being itself. She doesn't cling to outcomes or timelines. She knows that what is meant for her will find her, not through force, but through resonance. Her silence is her trust in that invisible rhythm. She no longer negotiates for affection, nor bargains for peace. She becomes peace. Psychologically, this is the deepest power a woman can embody, because when she stops chasing safety externally, she triggers a rewiring within herself, the healing of the attachment wound. She no longer views love as something to earn. She stops rehearsing her worth in the mirror of others' attention. Instead, she begins to see that her worth was never negotiable to begin with. This realization is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it demands that she step away from every role she's played, the pleaser, the caretaker, the savior. Liberating because she finally breathes without fear of being left behind. The silence she now carries is not withdrawal, it's arrival in herself. From this space, her energy transforms. The softness remains, but it's not fragile anymore. It's steady, grounded. She can listen without absorbing, love without losing herself, speak without explaining. Men feel this immediately, even through a single conversation. There's something in her tone, in her timing, in the pauses between her words. It says, I am not here to be chosen, I am here to choose. That kind of feminine presence is magnetic because it is rare. The world teaches women to speak louder, to hustle harder, to prove constantly. But real magnetism doesn't shout, it whispers. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that what is aligned cannot be missed. Silence in this form becomes not the absence of communication, but the highest form of it. It speaks directly to the subconscious. When she withholds words, not from fear, but from wisdom, a man's imagination awakens. His rational mind scrambles for control, but his instinct, his deeper, older instinct, feels drawn, because in the mystery of her silence lies the essence of all beauty, the unknown. Alan Watts once said that the meaning of life is to be alive, and yet so few people are. They're busy chasing it, defining it, capturing it in words. The same applies to love. The more one tries to grasp it, the more it slips away. The feminine understands this intuitively. Her silence is her way of letting love breathe, not trapping it in the cage of expectation. When a man finally meets a woman like this, one who doesn't beg for understanding, who isn't afraid to walk away, who can hold silence without collapsing into anxiety, he feels something he can't explain. He feels both safe and challenged, comforted and awakened. Her calm disrupts his patterns. Her detachment draws out his depth. He may not understand it, but he'll find himself thinking about her in quiet moments. Not because she did something to impress him, but because she didn't need to. Her absence doesn't feel like loss. It feels like gravity. She lives rent-free in his psyche because she represents something his soul craves. Peace without dependence, love without fear. And yet this story is not about him. It never was. The silence that drives him to obsession is not meant to capture him. It's meant to free her, to remind her that she doesn't need to become anyone's mirror to be loved, that her power was never in how much she gives, but in how much she embodies. The world will tell her that silence means weakness, that it's passive. But in truth, silence is the ultimate rebellion. It's saying, I will not explain my worth in your language. It's choosing to remain a mystery in a world addicted to exposure. It's returning to the sacred rhythm where attraction is not a chase, but a dance. Because the feminine is not meant to pursue, she is meant to pulse, to draw in what resonates, to let go of what doesn't. Her silence is not the end of connection, it's the purification of it. It strips away the noise, the pretense, the performance, leaving only truth. And truth, once felt, doesn't need to be spoken. There comes a time when words lose their power, when a woman realizes that no sentence will ever make someone understand her heart if they aren't ready to listen. So she stops, not out of resentment, but out of wisdom. She learns that silence is not a wall, it's a boundary woven from peace. It is her way of saying, I will not bleed for connection anymore. In this silence, something extraordinary happens. Her energy, once scattered in explanations and emotional labor, begins to gather, like a tide returning to the sea. Every time she doesn't chase clarity, she finds it within herself. Every time she doesn't demand to be seen, she sees herself more clearly. And slowly, her silence turns from self-protection into self-possession. A man can feel this shift even across distance. There's a subtle gravity in her absence, not the kind that begs to be noticed, but the kind that makes him notice without knowing why. Her silence becomes a mirror reflecting his own noise, his own confusion. He begins to feel the imbalance, the restlessness, the unease of having depended on her attention to feel significant. That unease is not punishment, it's revelation. Because the masculine is not meant to live off of the feminine's emotional energy. He is meant to rise to meet it. Her silence calls him to that higher ground. It asks wordlessly, can you meet me in stillness? Can you hold presence without needing to control it? But many cannot. They interpret her quiet as rejection, as disinterest, as pride. They don't yet understand that silence is her invitation to depth, the sacred pause between breaths where truth can finally emerge. Alan Watts often spoke of this paradox, that we fear emptiness, yet it is only in emptiness that we can be filled. The same is true in love. When she no longer fills every gap with reassurance, she allows space for something real to grow. Silence tests the foundation. It reveals whether affection was born of curiosity or comfort, attraction or attachment. The man who only wanted validation will run, but the man who is ready to evolve will stay, not to break her silence, but to honor it. And here lies the secret few speak of. Silence doesn't create obsession by withholding. It creates it by awakening. A man becomes obsessed not because she is playing games, but because her stillness awakens a forgotten part of him, the part that longs for the sacred, the part that misses peace, the part that yearns for something beyond the noise of ambition and distraction. Her silence reminds him of that. There is a strange beauty in this, a quiet revolution, because while the world glorifies performance, the feminine returns to presence. She becomes like nature itself, unhurried, unbothered, profoundly alive. Flowers do not open faster when you yell at them. Rivers do not flow straighter because you demand it. The feminine too unfolds in her own time. And when she does not announce it. Her silence deepens, but her eyes soften. She begins to see the world through a lens of compassion, not because she has forgotten the pain, but because she no longer identifies with it. Her stillness is forgiveness. Her quiet is clarity. To the unawakened man, this kind of woman is an enigma. He'll try to provoke her just to feel the old energy again, the spark, the argument, the chase. But she no longer bites. Her silence is her discernment. It says, I choose peace over proving. He may mistake it for indifference, but it is actually love in its purest form. Love that no longer demands a shape, a title, or a guarantee. And so he spirals, not because she has manipulated him, but because she has withdrawn from the game. The rules no longer work on her. He can no longer predict her emotions, no longer control the narrative. Her silence dismantles his illusions. And beneath that unraveling, he begins to question himself. Who am I without her attention? What have I been chasing? What is love if not control? That's the paradox of feminine power. It doesn't conquer, it reveals. A man is not destroyed by a woman's silence. He is revealed by it. His wounds, his insecurities, his need to be seen as powerful, all surface when her energy no longer feeds them. It is in this way that a silence becomes medicine, painful but necessary. And for the woman, silence is no longer a reaction. It becomes a ritual. It's the daily return to herself. The moment she chooses not to explain her boundaries, but to embody them. The moment she stops asking, do you understand me? And starts asking, do I understand myself? When she reaches that point, the obsession he feels is no longer her concern. It is simply the echo of what happens when the feminine awakens and withdraws her light from those who do not honor it. Her silence becomes sacred, untouchable, not cold, just true. Because the truth is, she was never trying to drive him to obsession. She was trying to remember herself. The obsession is merely the shadow cast by her rising. Eventually, silence becomes not just her language, it becomes her essence. It is the fragrance that lingers long after she leaves the room, the calm that unsettles those still searching for themselves in others. She no longer uses words to explain her worth. She embodies it. And this embodiment is what drives a man beyond desire into reverence. For the first time, he begins to sense what he could never grasp with logic, that her silence is not a void to be filled, but a presence to be felt. He realizes that she was never withholding anything from him. She was simply refusing to abandon her center. And that center, that still point in a spinning world, is what every man unconsciously seeks. Alan Watts spoke often of the dance between form and emptiness, that one cannot exist without the other. The feminine mystery lives in that paradox. She gives by not giving. She speaks by saying nothing. She loves not by attachment, but by freedom. It's an alchemy that breaks the pattern of modern relationships, where noise has replaced truth and attention has been mistaken for intimacy. The man who truly sees her begins to understand. He was never meant to possess her. He was meant to meet her, to stand before her in presence, stripped of games, of ego, of control, because the feminine doesn't want to be conquered. She wants to be witnessed. And that witnessing can only happen in silence. He starts to see how his obsession was never about her at all. It was about his longing to return to himself, the self that once knew peace before the world taught him to chase. Her silence exposed that hunger. It called him back, not to her, but to his own stillness. The irony is that while he thought she was the mystery, she was only reflecting his own. Meanwhile, she no longer waits for that recognition. She moves differently now. Her steps are slower, her eyes softer, her heart lighter. She knows that peace is not something found in another person's attention. It is the space between her breaths. It's the quiet that greets her in the morning when she no longer needs anyone to text her first. It's the silence that feels like home instead of loneliness. That is the feminine power the world has forgotten. Not the power that screams for equality by becoming louder, but the one that transcends comparison altogether. The power that does not need to compete because it is complete. She doesn't rise against the masculine. She rises beyond the illusion that she ever needed his validation to exist. Her silence now is not withdrawal, it's wisdom. It's the deep knowing that love cannot be forced, that attention cannot be begged, that the heart's true rhythm is not chaos, but calm. She has learned that detachment is not coldness, it is compassion without dependency. That distance is not rejection, it is clarity. And in that clarity, everything changes. Men feel her differently. They sense her energy before she speaks. She doesn't need to be mysterious. She is the mystery, because mystery is not about hiding. It's about depth. It's the awareness that not everything needs to be seen, that some beauty exists only in presence, not performance. This is what drives him to obsession. Not the absence of her words, but the abundance of her being. Her silence becomes a symphony he can't stop listening to, even when she's gone, because it awakens something rare, the ache for realness. But she does not hold that power over him. She holds it within herself. She knows that obsession, attention, desire, all of it are merely waves on the surface of something deeper, and that depth is her domain. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she no longer depends on understanding to feel whole. She has discovered that silence in its highest form is love, love for herself, love for the space that allows others to grow, love for truth, even when it comes dressed as solitude. Her silence is the fertile ground where her next chapter blooms, the one that doesn't revolve around who wants her, but around who she becomes in her own becoming. In this final realization, she smiles, not at him, but at life itself. The same life that once broke her heart now bows before her peace. She has learned the secret that changes everything. You do not lose love when you stop speaking. You lose illusion. You do not drive a man to obsession by being silent. You awaken him or you release him. Either way, you return to yourself. And that is where all true attraction begins. Not in noise, not in need, but in stillness. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.